What's up there, guys? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Rick, this is Fanfare for the Conscious, and in the video today I'm going to be talking about how the birth certificate and the strawman function. Let's dive in. So once again, I'm going to be covering a little bit more about the birth certificate and the legal strawman corporate fiction and the trust of the dead man's estate. Now, I know I've covered this a lot of other times previously on this channel. We've talked about it in a little bit of detail in some of my previous videos, which you'll find links to popping up just above me right now. If you want to go and check those videos out, please go and click on them and get yourself a little bit more familiar with the basic idea of it. But today we're going to try and go into a little bit more detail about how they've actually managed to achieve this fraud. Now, it is important to remind you at this point that I am no lay lawyer. I've just gathered enough information to be aware of to what degree this has occurred and approximately how best to describe it to other people. So what you'll be witnessing today is going to be a lay explanation thereof. I don't want you guys to think that this is a perfectly on-the-button description of what's going on, but it's more a way of giving you guys an idea of exactly how they've achieved this great scam in the first place, so that you can understand the layers and the levels and the many different chains and ropes they've put around your lawful person in order to prevent you from claiming your birthrights as a flesh and blood being. So I'm going to go through what I would describe as my best way of interpreting this sequence of events, my best way of relaying that to you. Again, apologies to anyone with a little bit more information if some of the terminology is not 100%, but it is worth noting at this point that I would consider myself to be speaking the common tongue in this video and not the legal tongue. So let's go through the series of events that have happened, and I've got a couple of different flow charts here. Now, this is more of a sort of a general idea of how the authority functions in these various levels, whereas this is more a flow of events within itself. And you can see they've kind of back-referenced themselves as I go through the explanation and retrospectively corrected things and all sorts of tomfoolery that have been going on in order to make this as muddy as possible so people don't actually understand what's going on and they are unable to cognize exactly what has happened to them. So they can't see the bars of the prison in which they've been contained. So we start off with the birth of the actual living flesh and blood being. So there's the little baby up there, the baby that's been born, and that's them. That's the flesh and blood entity, which is given a name in the common tongue, a calling, as you might call it. The method by which that child is called, i.e. what you'd refer to as a name, is recorded on the live birth record, which is a historical document that references the birth of that child, the coming into being of that child. birth. They've referenced a different thing with the birth certificate, which would actually really, if you were considering exactly what its function is be spelt with an E, B-E-R-T-H, because birthing is also a term used in maritime law whereby they're talking about the landing of stock, or the landing of assets, transferring thereof. There are berths on a ship where people are kept, where people sleep. There are berths for cargo. That is the sort of language that they're trying to use with the birth certificate itself, and that's the legal document. This is where the baby's name is spelled out in all capitals, and that all caps name becomes the strawman, which is the corporation, the legal fiction of the person. And this is what allows them to create the estate, because this birth certificate is not recognizing the birth, B-I-R-T-H, of a living human being. What it is recognizing is the B-E-R-T-H, the birth of the corporate fiction. Okay? Since, in the absence, according to the state, in the absence of any further records of life beyond this live birth record, the Crown, HM government, the Church declare the living being as being missing, presumed dead, which in their system of maritime law is perfectly arguable by their position that they're adopting there. There has not been any further recognition of the live being being in existence. Therefore, their estate is now held in trust by HM government, the Crown or the Church, and sometimes multiple entities in themselves. And they will all be called variations on your name. This is why we can see our names referenced in different manners. So Henry Mark Slave, for example, or Henry M Slave, or just Henry Slave. They use lots of different corporate names, and there's multiple different corporate and legal fictions which are created in the name of the estate. That is what this birth certificate allows. It allows the creation of the estate of the man, which is then held in trust by the government. The strawmen, the corporate legal fictions, these all caps names, are used as corporations that are operating in the name of the trust, and the trust is owned by HM government and the Church and the Crown. Now, it isn't really, but they've hidden this layer from us. In reality, the flesh and blood being stands above all else and can claim the estate and can reclaim its corporate legal fictions as being part of as being entities that are owned by the flesh and blood being. Instead, where most people are being left is down here. The corporate legal fiction owns your house, it owns your car, and it owns your living person. Since the corporate legal fiction is operating as an entity of the dead man's trust, and that dead man's trust is being operated by the Crown or HM government or the Church in absence of your flesh and blood being there to manage it themselves. And this is where the self-sovereignty comes into play. If we do not declare ourselves to be living, if we do not turn around and have our own documentation that records the fact that we are still alive and that that estate is now transferred to us as fully empowered adults, then this fiction continues. The problem with the corporate legal fiction and identifying with this is that a corporation does not have a home. A corporation has a premises. A corporation does not have a car or personal transport. A corporation has motor vehicles, and vehicles are instruments of commerce, which means when you are considered to be driving a vehicle, think about it as driving cattle. It is a vehicle that is used in order to conduct business. We're not talking about personal transport here, we're talking about someone actually needing a vehicle for the conduction of their very business itself. Think of somebody on a horse driving cattle. Think of somebody in a tractor ploughing his field. Think of somebody as a delivery man delivering packages to people. They require that transport to do their job, and therefore that transport is a vehicle of business. Cars are not vehicles of business. Cars are personal transport. Furthermore, corporations do not have living beings. Corporations have cattle. Corporations have slaves. Corporations have employees. And this is where they've convinced you that you are. The corporation, the straw man, of which you identify as, isn't a living entity at all. But your actual name is defined as an asset, a cattle, chattel, slave, serf of that corporation, which is again run by the trust, which is owned or run in the name of the Crown, HM government or the Church. Again, ostensibly it is for you. They are running that in lieu of you running it yourself. And that is where the sovereignty comes into it. So we've got the corporate fiction being created to manage the estate under the corporate maritime policy. And a further word on titles, just to polish this off. Titles are used for position of office and used for structures of hierarchy. Military rank, titles of barony, and offices of personhood. This is the legal person that they have you identifying with, an office of a person run by the corporation and the trust, which is owned and run by the Crown in lieu of your own personal governance. Titles denote subservience to a hierarchical structure. Free men do not have titles. Barons who held the land by royal decree used to be called to court of the Crown by a summons. This was eventually phased out in favour of creating baronies on demand by a summons of writ. And this is why any court document that you ever receive, any summons to court, will reference you by your title, Mr. Henry Mark Slave. It is trying to get you to accept a title of barony. When you accept that title of barony, you are accepting your subservience to the Crown and the system of Crown governance. So one more time from the top, because I get it, this is very, very complicated, and I'm still trying to figure out the exact details of this, but this is the best analogy I've been able to find to try and explain to people exactly how this works. So the flesh and blood being has not had any record of life signs since the historical live birth record. Instead, the parents did not register, they did not record any further life signs. They then registered the birth certificate, which is the all caps name. The all caps name was created as a corporation, which was supposed to be owned by the flesh and blood being, their trading name, their good name. Since the flesh and blood being does not have any further signs of life as recorded historically, they create an estate to manage that corporation in trust of the flesh and blood being. And the way this works is that any assets held in trust can be reclaimed at any given time by the flesh and blood being. Think about it when a young person inherits an awful lot of money from their parents. They are considered not able to manage that money themselves, so that money is then held in trust and managed by other people until that person is old enough that they can then claim that trust and that money, all those assets for themselves. This is exactly what's happened here. In the absence of any life signs and in absence of the adult claiming that estate, which is being held by the Crown, HM government or the Church in trust, without flesh and blood being showing any historical life signs to reclaim the estate that is being managed by HM government, the Crown and or the Church. Once again, the corporation, the legal fiction, does not own any real property because it is a business. Businesses do not have homes, they have premises. This is why they can take your premises away from you, because it is not considered a home. It is considered the premises of a legal fiction. This is why they can take your car away, because it's not considered to be a car. It is considered to be a motor vehicle, a vehicle of commerce. This is why they can lock your being up, because your being is not considered to be a flesh and blood being. It is considered to be an asset of the corporation. If the corporation does not operate in line with the diktats of the people who manage the trust, then they are subject to the corporate laws of that entity. And this is how the lawful remedy is going to work. The lawful remedy itself is going to provide those life signs which have been absent for all these years and allow this living being to step into the ownership of the trust. The trust is then dissolved because there is a living being that is now in place of that trust. So we scrub that away entirely. Now the trust doesn't exist anymore. And because this corporation now is not needed, we can also get rid of the strawman. These corporations are limited liability entities, and now the flesh and blood being has taken control of that name by copyright law, by law of precedence. Following on from that, now the flesh and blood being doesn't have any chattel, any slaves, and it doesn't have assets, it has property. And this motor vehicle is now a car, unless of course you're a delivery driver, in which case you would still have a motor vehicle for the conduct of business. And now this flesh and blood being doesn't have a premises. It has a home. And nobody can ever take your home away from you. And that is how this system works. Quite simply, we remove their power by asserting our life signs once again. More to come in the future on this exact subject. I have been in direct contact with Michael Obanisia. We're looking to put together a set of documents which will form the basis of our lawful records. Those documents are going to be based off the documents provided by Anna von Reitz for the American States Assembly, but merely adopted to suit our circumstances in Britain. Important to remind you at this point, the Americans have only had a few hundred years. I say only, a few hundred years is bad enough, of all this fraud, whereas in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, in England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland, and we have had this fraud for 2,000 years or more. So we've got an awful lot more to wind back over here, a lot more things to unpick, but we are getting there. There are very real people that are going about doing this very important work right now, besides the ones that I always mention. A big shout out to Neil Warren, who is grafting away sterlingly in the background, keeping lawfulbank.com looking like the sort of platform that we want to use and providing all that wonderful functionality. If you've not checked it out, get down in the description below, click on the link there and get yourself signed up. Best worked on a PC or a Mac. If you do have to use your phone, please go and set your browser to show the desktop version. That's the best way to interact with the site. If you get hung up on some of the photo uploads, don't worry about that. Just tick on as best you can. We'll solve that in due time. Other people worth noting, obviously Gary Mead and Joseph Hayes over in the American States Assembly. They're doing some wonderful things if you do want to get involved and see what's going on over in America as a framework for what we can achieve over here in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain. Then please go and check those links out in the description section below. That just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching. If you did like this content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the thumbs up and the notification bell set to all. Make sure you're always kept up to date with all my latest videos, which drop on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays at 8 PM UK time. Don't forget to stay free, think free and act free, and I will see you all next time.